Hey everyone, and welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to do an unboxing video of a new plasma cutting machine. This is the Bestarc 9th generation 50 amp plasma cutter. They were kind enough to send me this machine for free. I want to make that very clear. But they contacted me and asked if they sent me this machine, if I would do them the pleasure of doing an unboxing video and do a full review of this machine, give them my thoughts using this in my commercial professional shop. So I want to make it very clear that I have no financial interest in whether or not you like this machine. I'm going to give you my real world review. I have a very high-end automotive repair and restoration shop. I have several plasma cutters in this shop already. They are all name brand. I won't tell you which ones they are, but they are one of the top-of-the-line machines and very, very expensive. So I've got a lot of experience using high-end plasma cutters. So we're going to compare that to this Bestarc plasma cutting machine. And I think it's only fair for you, the viewers, to understand that, because I feel like 90% of the people that are going to be buying a machine like this are home hobbyist guys, maybe small professional shops. And a lot of the reviews you're going to see out there are also people similar, where they are that home hobbyist. They're not using these a whole lot. They might break it out for a job here or there, use it a couple times a year. Where in my shop, we might not use plasma cutters every single day, but we definitely use them multiple times a week. And when we're using them really hard. So you'll definitely want to check back on my channel a few months from now for follow-up videos, because after we put this thing through the paces for weeks, months, years even, we will continuously put out videos now and then on how this is holding up to commercial use and comparing that to our name brand machines. And if it can hold up to my abuse in this shop, then you'll really know how well it's going to hold up for you in your setting. So you're going to want to make sure you subscribe to both of my YouTube channels, Motor Mike at YouTube, as well as Phillips Hot Rods. Links to both channels will be in the description below. There'll also be a link where you can find this plasma cutter for sale if you're interested in purchasing one. So with that said, let's go ahead and get this opened up and check it out. So this machine has a very small footprint compared to some of the other machines I have. And this is a 50 amp machine. So the nice thing is it's pretty portable, which will be a great feature. All right, so we got a box here, probably with all the cords, accessories. Very lightweight. That's the first thing I noticed. Okay, now the nice thing about this machine, so it does 220 and 110 as well. Obviously there's going to be different cut capacities and ratings, duty cycles, depending on what voltage you are running. But that's another great feature if you need it. Outside, you got to run some extension cords or something. You don't have to have a 220 source. Well, my initial assessment on the visual quality, this thing's built very nice. Super lightweight, like I said. I'm impressed by the digital screen. None of my other machines have a digital screen. It's already got an air port hooked up. More than likely that's not going to fit my shop. This probably, however, is the correct quick fitting for what most of the guys run at their houses. It's the stuff that's commonly found at your typical hardware stores. In a commercial setting, an automotive shop, we use a different style than most people use around their house. All right, we got obviously the instructions. Piece of braided tubing. Ground cable. Looks to be pretty long as well. That's nice. Here's your adapter to run 110 volts. So this will obviously just plug in to the end of the cord, convert it down to 110. All right, the actual plasma torch itself. Again, pretty long. I don't know exactly how long it is. We can measure it out. The build quality of this is actually pretty impressive. Looks like it comes with a wrench. And then we have what appears to be some consumables, some hose clamps, and a little roll of Teflon tape. Got this nice digital display on the front here. A couple buttons, we'll play with them. Adjustment knob. This is an air pressure regulator. We'll talk about that as well. We've got a twist lock connector, a 2-pin quick connector for the torch. This is where your ground cable for your torch is going to go. It's nice you don't need any tools for that. And this must be where the air line comes off. They've got a protector on it. Keep debris out of there during shipping. That's nice. So this torch, I am very impressed by the quality of the materials. The plastic does not feel cheap. The hinges on the safety feel nice. The switch feels good, doesn't feel real cheap and junky like it's going to break. And here's a nice feature I just noticed. It has a swivel ball connection on the end of the hose. It's not super rigid. Comes with the distance guide on the end, we'll call it. You never want the tip of your torch to actually physically touch your material. You want a little bit of air spacing. Otherwise you get blowback into the actual torch itself and it burns your consumables up. So like I was saying, it comes with some extra consumables. 2 more sets. Some hose clamps and some Teflon tape. The voltage adapter is also very nice quality. On the other end of the torch, we have the air line. Again, it looks like you can get this on with no tools. It's got this nice knurled handle. You might want to put a wrench on here just so you can get it a little snugger, but it looks like you can get away without tools. You have the eyelet, which is going to go on this thumb nut. And then you have the 2-wire connector. This is basically the contacts for the actual activation switch itself. Pretty nice quality, and again, I'm really impressed with the length of these. These look longer than the ones that come standard on my other machines. Now looking at the ground cable, quick quarter turn twist lock, no tools required. I like that again. The actual ground clamp itself, kind of a thin sheet metal construction compared to what I'm used to, but at the same time it seems pretty durable. Don't assume just because it's thinner than what you're used to that it's not good, because let's face it, some things are just overbuilt and they're overkill. Time will tell if this thing lasts 20 years like my other machines. It has a nice braided strap, so both sides of the jaws are a good ground connection. You don't always see that on a lot of machines. Very often the cable bolts to one jaw, and then you're relying on your connectivity going through the actual rivet or through the hinge. So it's nice that both sides are good common grounds. Let's get some initial setup. So our ground cable, that feels nice and sturdy. And we've got all of our leads from the torch. This has a detent, so you cannot put this on in the wrong direction. We'll take the thumb nut off here. Has a little flat washer underneath. Put the eyelet on. Flat washer. And just get that nice and hand tight. Then the air line. Now before we go plugging this machine in, let's go over some of the features that set this apart from some other machines. Yes, I'm going to be reading this out of the catalog. Like I said, I don't know anything about this machine. I never even heard of this brand. I don't have this stuff memorized. I'm learning it as I'm speaking to you. All I do know about this machine is that it is the 9th generation, and this is a 50 amp rated machine. The only reason I know those two specs is because it's written on the box. So let's get into the nit and gritty on some of the specs, and we'll compare that to the specs on my big commercial grade machines that I have in the shop. So again, this is a 50 amp rated machine. It is dual voltage, like I said, 110, 220, and it automatically adjusts depending on which plug you have it into. You do not have to actually physically change it on the machine. It'll automatically sense it and adjust itself for that situation. Has that digital screen on the front, which I really like. I say that, but I haven't used it yet. But let's face it, digital is awesome. You can adjust the pilot arc, and you can also adjust the post flow of the air after you turn the torch off. That really helps with your consumable life. We'll get into that here in a few minutes. It has the built-in air pressure regulator, pretty common on pretty much all machines. My other machines have it at the air inlet on the back where I actually plug in, but having this one built into the faceplate just shows that they thought about what the users need and incorporated it into the construction of the machine itself. Since this has that pilot arc adjustability, this will cooperate well when you're cutting anything that has a bunch of holes or gaps in it, such as wire mesh, perforated screen, things like that. None of my older machines have that feature, so that'll be a really nice addition to the shop, and I'll explain what all that means once we get this thing up and running. Now, another nice feature of this machine is it has the 2T and 4T control function. 2T is pretty much what you're going to use most of the time. When you have the trigger, you squeeze it on, you have to hold it the whole time, and you let go, it turns off. 4T is when you can squeeze it, let go, the machine will keep running. You don't have to keep holding the trigger. It'll keep operating until you squeeze it again and let go, it'll turn off. The T means times, 2 times or 4 times. How many times does that control switch function to operate? I personally always use everything in 2T, but I'm sure there's guys out there that like and appreciate that 4T function, so this machine does have that feature. So some of the features on this machine are, when you're plugged into a 110, you're not going to be able to pull that 50 amp through the machine. So when you are in 110 volts, this machine can go as low as 15 amps and hold a stable arc. You can cut up to 35 amps. When you're in the 220 setting, you're going to get that full 50 amps, and still you can go down to as low as 15 amps and still hold a stable arc. Now, no matter what voltage you're running, the duty cycle of this machine is 60%. That's actually pretty darn good. Now let's compare that to my name brand machines. I have two. I looked them up. So I have a 30 amp machine and a 50 amp machine. Both of my machines, the 30 and the 50, have a duty cycle of 50%. So right then and there, we've got 60% duty cycle versus 50%. Now the spec I'm sure everyone's been really anxious to hear about is how thick of a piece of material can this machine cut. There's a couple options depending on which voltage you're running. Now, if you are going to get a nice clean cut, if you are in 110 volt, this will get a clean cut up to 10 millimeters thick. Now that's equivalent to about 3/8 of an inch thick. If you are in 220 volt, you can get a clean cut up to 14 millimeters thick. That's equivalent to about 9/16 inch thick. 14 mil and 9/16 are a very close cross. Now there's also the sever capacity. That means it will cut the material in half, but it's not going to be pretty. It's going to have a lot of taper, there's going to be a lot of dross and slag stuck to the bottom of the material, but it will cut it in half. Your feed rate's going to have to be a little slower, and it's not going to be pretty, but it will cut it. With that said, in the 110 setting, you can get up to 12 millimeter. Compare that pretty close to about 1/2 of an inch. A 1/2 inch is a little bit smaller than 13 millimeter. So 12 to 13, that 1/2 inch, it's really close to that. In the 220 setting, you can get a sever cut up to 16 millimeters thick. That's massive. This little tiny machine can sever up to 16 millimeter thick steel. Now I say all these different capacities and they don't go without some sort of machine and user adjustment. If the material is thicker, you're going to want to move your hand with a slower feed rate. If it's thinner, you can move a lot faster and get a good cut quality. But also, depending on the voltage you're running, as I said multiple times, depending on if you're 110 or 220, the machine will automatically adjust for the voltage. You don't have to hit a voltage button on the front. It'll sense it and it'll automatically make the change. But you do have to change your PSI of your air input, and that's where you use this knob here in the front. For example, if you're running 110 volt, you're going to adjust for cut quality somewhere between 20 and 40 PSI, depending on how thick the material is. Small adjustments make a difference in cut quality. If you're running 220 volts, you're going to be somewhere between 30 and 60 PSI, depending on the material thickness you are cutting at that voltage. So it takes a little bit of trial and error to get things set up the way you like it. So after you use it a couple of times, you're going to find what works best for your niche that you work on the most. The nice thing is you don't have to memorize all this stuff. There is a nice chart right on top of the machine, so you can just take a quick reference to that, look at what you're cutting, make one quick adjustment on that knob on the front, and get the job done right the first time. So enough of the boring stuff. Let's get this thing plugged in, see it light up. Let's make some cuts. We're going to start out using a 110 volt feature because I still have to make that adapter for the 220 because my building has a different plug than comes on this machine. So that's not a big deal. We'll get to that later in the video. But let's turn this thing on for the first time and get it started up. Hit the power switch in the back. All right, you can see it booting up. All right, so we're throwing an EO5. I'm going to assume that's an error code EO5. I don't have any air hooked up to this yet. So let's plug in some air and make sure that error code goes away. Get this on the tripod. Plug some air in the back. All right, and immediately that error code went away. So that was because I had no air hooked up. All right, so let's play with some of these controls. So right now this button here is, you'll see it says cut. So in order to set the air pressure correctly, you have to have the air flowing out of the nozzle so you know exactly what it's going to be during cutting conditions. So if you hit this button, it goes to air. You might be able to hear, you can hear that air flowing. So now we can pull this knob out and we can adjust the air pressure during the cutting conditions. So we're going to set this around 35-ish. We'll push that in, lock that, so now it can't move. We can hit this again. It stops the flow. Now we're back into air only flowing during cut. That's a really cool feature. My other machines, I can't do that. I have a regulator similar to this on the back of the machine with a mechanical analog gauge. And I have to actually physically start an arc, and I can adjust it on the fly while there's an arc flowing. So that's really cool that we can do this while we're not cutting. So again, this number here when the machine's not on, that doesn't really mean a whole lot. You need to set it while it's flowing. This button here cycles back and forth between 2T controls and 4T controls. Now this button here, when there's nothing said next to these green dots, that means it's in its basic screen, and this knob is adjusting cutting amps. So you see we're in 110 volt. It automatically recognized we're plugged into 110. If we plug in the 220, it should automatically switch over and say 220 here. But when you're in 110, you have a maximum of 35 amps. Now when we hit this button one time, it says PT, and we are adjusting a seconds timer here. See, it says S. So we can go down as low as 3 seconds up to 15 seconds. That is the post-flow timing for how much air continues to flow out of the end of the torch to cool your consumables off. It really helps with consumable life. So you might be thinking, why don't you just keep it at 15 seconds all the time? And realistically, you could do that. There's no reason you can't. It is a little bit annoying. Having it down real short makes it shut off quicker, obviously, but it doesn't cool your consumables down. I kind of paused, so it timed that one back to the main screen. We're going to keep that at like 5 or 6 seconds. We'll keep it at 6. Now if you hit it again, it goes to PA. That is setting your pilot arc time. We can go down as 1 second. We can go as high as 15 seconds. That is how long the machine kind of stays active to re-arc, to reinitialize a pilot arc when it sees a loss of continuity because you're cutting across a piece of material that has perforations, holes, screen, anything where you, as you're cutting across and you get into a hollow and it loses that continuity to ground, the arc will shut off, but as soon as it sees continuity again, it'll automatically restart that pilot arc and start cutting again before it times out. We'll keep that at 5 seconds. Now, if you hit it a third time, everything goes away and you go back to the main screen. Or like I said, if you have a pause between inputs and it sees you're not doing anything, it automatically times out and goes back to the main screen where this knob once again becomes a amp cut adjustment. So that's the basic overview of these controls. I'm very impressed. I don't have any of these features on my other machines. I cannot adjust post flow. I cannot adjust pilot arc restart time. I don't have 2T, 4T function on any of my other machines. And I cannot adjust my airflow pressure while it's flowing without physically starting an arc. But let's face it, this machine doesn't just need to look cool, it needs to perform well. So let's start our first ever arc and see how this thing cuts some metal. Start with something super generic. This is a piece of 18 gauge steel. Let's just clamp this in the vise here. We'll give it a real easy test first. Took up our ground. All right, let's see what happens. That was nice and clean. Pilot starts very fast. It's a pretty clean cut. Very nice. Let's see how it does on the pierce. So pierce is, we started in the middle of the piece and it had to actually punch through as opposed to starting out off the edge and then coming into the material. Machines that don't have a lot of power, where the arc's not real strong and stable, they have a hard time punching through. They take too long and they make a really ugly pierce. This is only 18 gauge. Let's do a couple more holes. The reason I want to do some holes is because we're going to test out that pilot arc. So with a couple sloppy holes in here, let's see how this pilot arc restart goes for going across the perforation. So as I come across here and enter a hole, I'm not going to let off the trigger, but the arc should stop and automatically restart when I get back into material. Okay, that was fun and all, but let's face it, cutting 18 gauge steel doesn't prove anything. Here's a nice piece of dirty 1/4 inch steel plate out of my drops pile. So this was a saw cut. I didn't even have a machine that could cut something this thick prior to this. This says it can do it. Let's see if it holds up to it. Now this thing is filthy. It's got oil all over it. It's got metal dust all over it. It's been laying under the saw for a long time. Let's see how well this can cut. Wow. Pretty clean cut with the exception of my wiggly hand. Now just for the heck of it, let's see how well it can pierce 1/4 inch. Okay, that wasn't terrible. All right, Houston, we have a problem. Well, it pierced 1/4 inch steel plate. I'm impressed. I don't have another machine that can do that. But halfway through the cut, I just popped the breaker on that 110 outlet. So I'm pretty sure that that breaker is probably a 20 amp breaker, and we're running 35 amps of cut. Not surprised we just popped the breaker. If we want to cut thick stuff like this, I should really have this thing on the 220 feature. So let's bump it up, get that 220 cord adapter made, and see how it does now. All right, so I whipped up this quick adapter. That is the outlet on the machine currently. This end is the 50 amp plug that my shop operates on. Turn it on in 220. This should automatically sense the 220. And there it is. It says 220. So now we should be able to get up to 50 amps out of this thing. Okay, well, before we did a pierce on 1/4 inch plate at the 35 amps on 110 volt, and it did it. Impressive. Let's see what happens at 50 amps, which is what we should be doing. All right, we got pierce. We have ourselves a hole. Let's do a straight cut across this 1/4 inch plate while using 220 at 50 amps. We're going to cut over, we're going to enter this hole and see if the pilot arc automatically restarts exiting the hole. Pretty nice cut for a hand-fed cut. 1/4 inch plate, dirty 1/4 inch plate, 50 amps. So you probably can't hear it, but the fan is running right now, and that light right there says fan. So the machine automatically sensed that it needed to cool down, and it will automatically cycle the fan on and off, and right there it tells you when the fan is running. Something you should always keep in mind with any of your equipment is I'm finished cutting right now, so normally I would just come over and shut this thing off and walk away and continue on with my day. But the fan is running. Not only can I hear it, but the light on the front says that the fan is on. I should let this thing cool off before I shut power down, otherwise this thing might heat soak and could damage some internal components. So don't turn your equipment off until that fan function shuts down. It'll get down to a temperature where it's happy, the fan will shut off, then you can turn the power off and walk away. That'll really keep your equipment lasting a lot longer. Well, so far I'm super impressed with the performance of this Bestarc 50 amp plasma cutting machine. This thing outperforms every other plasma cutter in my shop. So from now on, this is the dedicated machine that me and all my guys are going to use. Nothing else. It's going to be this and this alone. We are going to beat this thing up for months and months and months to see how well this thing lasts, how it performs over time, and that's going to be the true test. Commercial setting, commercial abuse. So do not forget to check back in. I'll post some update videos maybe every couple months to see how this thing's going. But we have a couple jobs coming up in the next few days where we need to do some plasma cutting, so I'll make sure to get some footage of that and I'll dump that in at the end of this video, so check that out. But make sure you subscribe and make sure you check out both of my channels, not only the Motor Mike channel but also the Phillips Hot Rods and Customs channel as well. Links will be down below. You can also find a link below where you can find this machine for sale if you're interested in having one for yourself. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.